saw them on Discord. Oliver introduced me to it, and it seems incredibly vast. Um,
it is, yeah.
so I stick to the stuff that's about sword and sorcery, and things like that. Um, a lot of the conversations, these guys are, going on about stuff, and it's like I have nothing to contribute really, Um, but it seems like an electronic version of fanzines, man. I'll tell you, from way back in the day, just chat, back and forth about ideas and stuff.
That is quite an apt comparison since
Hey,
the fanzines are one of the basic building blocks of communities in that
I was,
time, aren't they?
yep, I was so much part of that back in the 70s. That's when my first stories were published. So, and the fanzines go back to the
Wow.
30s or 40s with this. So. Because all that fiction, I mean, it started at the start of the 20th century, and largely in America, I guess, at that time, where the printing
Yeah.
presses and all, and technology and stuff. But I mean, it was like for a generation, that's where you got your entertainment. If you look at old movies, you'll find people sometimes like the nurses reading a romance pulp or something before someone walked in after a question. They were everywhere. And then a lot of those writers, also did stuff for radio, then they moved to TV. There was still who's the guy? If you ever see this old big red covered tabletop books, it's called a pulp. Big red cover in this like a Fu Manchu type character on the it's from some racist, evil Chinese pulp character from 39 or 40, but it reprints that cover. And I forget the name of the author of the story, but it's like the Manchu Terror or something by so and so. So that's from about 1939, 1940. I was watching a TV detective show around 1970, 1971, and the script was written by that guy. So these people just
Oh,
kept rolling along, writing these stories. Um, that they seem to be fundamental to storytelling. I think they really tapped into stuff. This the way they did it.
I guess it opened doors to further mediums later on,
Absolutely, absolutely.
just spread
And
into.
we've talked about like in previous episodes where like the pulps they have like all these things that we consider tropes in them,
Yep.
but they're the ones that created the
Yes,
tropes.
Yeah, it wasn't tropey back then.
yes, exactly.
It took like 100 years for them to become
It
tropes,
it
or
did, it did.
slightly less. Yeah.
And I like to think of them as being like like if you read like the Iliad and Homer has these long, I forget what they call them, like these phrases coming back to, the rosy fingered dawn, and all that kind of stuff. Those would have been tropes in their day. I mean, they lock you in a little bit to get you in there. I think is what they do. Howard used them. I know a lot of people think, well, they're cliches and it's lazy writing, but I've given this some thought. I don't think so. I think they're like stepping stones. They bring you along. You don't have to think too hard. You can just keep going with the action or with the characters. I think it's this to me. It seems that's what they're doing for readers back then.
Yeah, we were talking about current day sword and sorcery and how it's a trapping of the genre that you get the hero and you have to follow the hero because he's the hero or she's the
Hmm.
hero. So sword and sorcery just basically, or the short stories at least, not the novels
Sure.
necessarily, but they jump into the action and they give you the character and you have to
Right.
follow the character. But it's not like it's a trope in that the writing needs to sustain that action
Yeah.
so that you actually end up liking the character in spite of not getting a lot of description because the writing is so good and so tight
That's
that you look past the tropes and you start liking
that's ideally
what's
what
going
you
on.
want. Yeah, that's the idea. You just keep moving, and the trope comes up, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, that's the way we think of whatever it is, a city, this movement, that kind of animalistic thing, whatever it is, and we just keep moving. It's a specific kind of writing, you know, um, which is perfect for its form. I mean, different from radio, different from novels, different from what would be called, you know, I hate to use the term good literature because it's all literature, but the highbrow stuff, that goes for it's a different genre really. But no, this stuff is kind of remarkable the way I just read a book. I'm sorry, I'm jumping by Mark McGurl, funny name, but he wrote a book called Everything and Less about how Amazon has taken over the whole world, and it has tended to dictate the way that fiction is written now because you want to write so you can get on Amazon and then sell your book and that kind of stuff. And he has a quote in there, something about what was pulp and what was popular fiction. Scholars used to look down their nose at it, but now they no longer do. I mean, they have come to understand what it's about, the function that it serves. And there's good writing and there's mediocre and bad writing. It just depends on, writing it.
It's a bell curve, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely a bell curve. That's why you get upset when critics dismiss Robert E. Howard. I spent a lot of time with Howard, wrote a biography and I, did some close reading and stuff. And man, he was right inside this. He knew exactly what he was doing, when he's putting the stuff together. And because his foundation was as a poet, man, that comes through. You kind of slow down and read what he's doing. Imagine him typing it, and it's like, wow, look what he's doing here with these syllables or these sounds, or repeating this, or something. And that's poetry. That's the way you write poetic stuff. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, and it has stood the test of time.
It has. It has.
Regardless of what some critics say, it's
Yeah.
still, it's
Yeah, we don't have to name them. They're on my list.
Yeah.
Jerks, the list of jerks.
Hey everyone, welcome to this rather special edition of the Gung-Ho Book Club. We're not only done reading a book this time, but we're also going to be interviewing the author, and it is Mr. David C. Smith of, for us recently, Red Sonja fame. Now we're just done talking about the first 3 Red Sonja novels, and as always, I am Costin Becchiano, but you can call me Cozzy. I'm joined by my friends Efty and Cam. And Mr. Smith is also here with us. He has graciously agreed to take some time out of his schedule to talk about Sometime Lofty Towers, which is currently seeking and almost reaching, actually, the funding goal on BackerKit. It is on 80% funded, last I checked, or near enough anyway.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Yeah. Basically, by the time you edit this, the book will be funded, I'm sure.
Probably, yes. I was actually talking to Oliver Brackenbury, the editor. This is coming out from New Edge Sword and Sorcery. And we were talking about releasing this a little later on in the campaign to help the middle campaign lull along, because it sort of dips in the middle and then picks up again at the end. So by the time this sees the light of YouTube, it might already have been funded. It's going really great as far as I'm concerned. So congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, wow. I'm kind of blown away. Yeah, that's.
I
That's wild.
know the book was published in 2020 initially, but Oliver was saying how it went on Amazon and that was it. Speaking of what we were talking
Pretty
about
much,
earlier,
yeah. It
which
just
is
kind of sat there. Yeah.
it just went there. Yeah. So and in his words, it was a travesty. So I think he's very very pleased with how everything is going now. So it is another sword and sorcery book from you. You've had a lot of them over the years. Can you talk a bit about the process? As far as I'm aware, the manuscript has been around for a while, but you took a while to bring it to the finalized version.
Oh yeah.
How,
Sometimes, yeah. It's that discussion that's in the back of the book, the question and answer. And it was very personal. I started it following the death of my father. I mean, within weeks of the death of my father, in 1997. And he was, so I can't say enough good things about him. He was just a good guy. And I loved hunting and fishing, and he'd been in World War II, and he married his high school sweetheart. And he liked building and construction. He built the house that he raised his family in. We've got some old 8mm movies of him hammering things, and he built that house, and we all grew up in that house, and that's what he loved to do. His job was as an estimator, so he would estimate the the amount of material needed and the cost and the manpower that would be needed, to build the wing of a hospital or something like that. And so he worked for a place called the Asbestos Service Company. And so they had a little office up here at the top over here. And then on the other side was a huge warehouse where they would bring in the huge rolls of asbestos, mineral, which is mined in Canada and in America and all over the world, really. And it was actually known as far back as the 1920s that too much exposure to it will kill you. It was a poison that it will cause cancer. And that information was frankly kept secret by the manufacturers, primarily John Manville Corporation. I think they're in Colorado. So all through the 20th century, this material was used. It was used to make things like the material that
Insulation.
holds tile down. It was used in roofing tile and stuff. It was used in battleships built in World War II. It was used in everyday construction. So as a result of my father working where he did and all the guys that he worked with, they all eventually developed asbestosis, which is, like a lung cancer and mesothelioma, and it kills you. It's in his case slowly killed him. A lot of the guys he worked with, and I knew these men, they were all good guys, were dead within like 2-3 years of their diagnosis. My
Wow.
father didn't work directly with it. So he hung on at home for 16 and a half years, having parts of his lung taken out, trying to keep alive. And he walked around being absolutely infuriated that this could happen to him, to anybody, that the manufacturer, maintained this lie. And I mean, he was an honest, good-hearted guy. And it's like he followed the rules and built a good life for himself and his family. Now this happens because some corporation lied and deliberately hurt people, So that's the genesis of Hanlon. And in fact, my wife the other day, she said when she read the first couple chapters of the book, said, "That's your dad." That was it when he was struggling with that disease, and he was so angry all the time. He says, all the time. I said, "Man, you caught it." It's like, well, my dad didn't have a sword, but otherwise. So that was the genesis of the book, and I wanted to follow a character in that situation because my dad wrestled with that so much, and there didn't seem much he could do about it. So how do you find peace with something like that? His whole past, which had been so successful and he'd enjoyed, couldn't let go of it, and that's where that line comes from. I mean, he could not let go. So that's the genesis. The early notes that I put down, were turned into sections of the book, like meditations on death and mortality and meaning and stuff. And it was just honest stuff from my part. So I wrote 2 or 3 chapters in 97, 98. And then I didn't lose interest, but I was like, where do I go from here? So it would sit there for a year or two. I would add another chapter. Like there's the one where he meets the Kiranji, it's like the indigenous peoples that he initially fought against, and now he's sympathetic to them. He meets them on a trail in the road, and there's a scene there, and I thought, well, okay, I'm going to write that scene. And so I got about a third of the way through, and then another part. I would write another part. So this went on for more than a decade, and about 20, I don't know, book came out in when
2020, I think.
2020. Yeah, so around, I guess, 2017, 2018, I just kind of sat with my laptop and I said, let's just see where it goes. And I just started typing. And I already had a ton of notes for stuff, some things I had to cut that didn't work. So I would type, on the scroll, on the doc, and then I come up with something, like throw it at the bottom, and then I see if I could use it. So I had a huge scroll of stuff. And eventually it all got tidied up. And I had a lot of paper notes I'd written over the years, so I put those in there. and some scenes worked out, some the characters changed, but that's how it came about. And so the impetus for it was my emotional reaction to my dad's death, and like psychologically, but almost like, I mean, from subconsciously making use of that stuff. And where I grew up, I'm kind of a country boy. There was woods and fishing, and everything about. I grew up around woods and trees, and that's where we vacationed and stuff. So that's why all of that is in the book. That's the kind of man he is. He's the natural man. He's one with nature and knows that stuff. So
Yeah,
it's a long answer, but that's there it is. So
that's
sorry.
fine. So, do you think that as you wrote it bit by bit, um, do you relate to it differently than you did in the beginning? Did you also start writing it with like a rage, and then it sort of helped
Yeah,
lessen it?
it did. What's the phrase for it? You work the stuff out.
Catharsis.
Yeah, yeah, catharsis. Thank you. Um, I did get there, and when you get like to the last third of the book, I was starting to feel that, both because I was constructing something, and there's rules for that more or less, and because he'd reached the point where how much longer can he sustain this? What can he do? He's got to develop or do something about it. That's a dramatic aspect. But yeah, after and I put it away, and then I come back, I get angry again, and put it away, come back, get angry. But eventually, yeah, I kind of made my peace with that part of the project, finishing the book, and so yeah, and I did it. I sent a copy to my sister when it was published, and I don't know if she's read the whole book yet, but she read the last part. She was crying, it's like, oh man, you caught it, with dad, all that. So, but it's kind of a unique way to write a book. I'd never done it before. I wanted to do it. I wanted to be like kind of literary, I mean, I wanted to have that aspect to it. So yeah, yeah.
That was going to be one of my next questions. Do you tend to do that, or have you done that type of writing before, where you let it simmer for ages and then go back to it? Or like, what's your regular writing process? How do you just sit down and say, well, I'm gonna sit here for 2 hours and write whatever comes to me, or how does that work?
Initially, yes. That's how I learned to write. Yeah, and for fanzines and writing short stories, just sit down and start typing. And when it came to the Red Sonja books, I'd already been writing for a couple of years, written some books that, well, like Oron eventually was published, or the Sonjas. But yeah, with the Sonjas, I did what I had learned to do in typing the short stories, which is let's just sit down. I mean, I was young, and it's like there's a million ideas and all this stuff. And I would just start typing, and so then Dick Tierney would take that manuscript, and then he would mold it in the way he would want. Sometimes he was fine with it, sometimes he wasn't. So that pretty much became my pattern. That I could sit down and do that. When I wrote this huge fantasy trilogy, my agents at the time said, "Fantasy trilogies are selling. We need from you," because they think in terms of product. Um, the fantasy trilogy I ended up writing is completely unlike the way we think of trilogies today. The fantasy trilogies today, mine was more like quasi-historical, and I used some historical things in it. But that I had to outline so they could show that to around to editors, the publishers. I did send some outlines to Zebra for some of the later Oron books, and then if I felt like I would ignore them, I'd just take the story wherever I wanted, Because that's when I really had to think through. So in that one, I did follow an outline, and some later stories, I kind of came up with an outline. I wrote a novel I really like about. I love silent movies. I love movies and cinema and silent movies. So I wrote one about an actress in Chicago in the 19 teens when most movies were made here in Chicago, where we live now. Um, that required an enormous amount of work and notes and going back and forth and stuff. But when it comes to writing this type of fiction, I guess it's because I've written so much of it, um, that it kind of writes itself now. I kind of know where I'm going, and I can only say that I've written enough of it that it seems to do that, seems to work that way. So it depends on the kind of story I'm writing, I guess.
So if I understand correctly, in the Red Sonja books, you were basically the writer and your co-author was more of a very active editor.
Somewhat, yeah. I would call him a co-author. Um, he would edit stuff in the text that he felt was necessary. But I don't think he added too much, but he would polish. It came out. The books came out really to be a good cohesion of both of our styles. When I look at them now, I can see, because I've read enough of Dick Tierney's work, I can see him. He writes very solidly. I'm kind of fluid in that kind of stuff. But yeah, in a couple of the fifth one, I really couldn't really get my head around very well. It's a good story, but Dick took it and really polished it. The fourth one, for some reason, kind of wrote itself. It didn't have to do too much. But yeah, so he would. I hate to use the term rewrite, but he would polish. He would finesse it. Might do a little line editing, things like that. Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Do you ever look back, maybe even on Lofty Towers, or maybe even the Sonias? Do you look back on books now and feel like, oh, I would do things much differently now, or would you not betray your older self, if as it were?
You know what? I actually don't. And I think it's because people say, oh, I read Red Sonja number whatever. It's like, that's pretty good. Okay, I did a good job then. I guess it's okay. It's kind of a cliche, but once the thing is done, I let it sit there. The readers, it belongs to readers now. And then I'll start thinking about the next thing I want to work on. And that's what keeps me going. The next thing.
Yeah, fair
Well,
enough.
while we're talking about the next thing,
Yeah.
I'm very curious if you considered, after writing this book, have you considered writing more of Hanlin? I understand the very specific circumstances of creating the character, but have you considered, for instance, making more stories about his younger years, perhaps?
That's not a bad idea. I did that with Oron when he was successful. It would be interesting to look at him and Thorum when they were younger soldiers and fighting those wars. I had not thought about it until now when you mention it.
We were actually, both of us wanted to ask this question.
I see.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. You think it'd make a good story? I mean, I guess it would make a good story.
I would definitely be interested in the prequel and the way you would look at that conflict from a completely different standpoint for Hanlin and for Thorum.
Oddly
Yeah,
enough,
me
It
too.
would be it would be completely different because they'd be 20 years younger. They wouldn't be ruminating on the lessons to learn. They'd just be young guys out there, living a life and being, warriors and fighters and wenchers or whatever. But the seeds of who they're going to become would be there. That'd be
It would
interesting.
I would
It-
actually be very curious about them right after the wars end, and to basically follow a parallel evolution of how Thorim does when he basically goes on being a mercenary for guarding caravans and whatnot, while Hanlin goes on and eventually
settles
tries to
down.
become a trader.
Yeah.
It would be one section, one, then the other guy, then one guy and the other
Yes,
guy. Yeah.
something like
Interesting
that. And
parallel of how they. Yeah.
first, yeah, and then you can add in the scene where they meet up, like 5 years previous to sometime Lofty Towers, where they, I don't know,
Yeah.
have a bar fight or something.
It would definitely it would definitely be a more traditional sword and sorcery novel in terms of action, because Lofty Towers is more of a mature psychological piece, as well as having the action and the gore and everything. But
Sure.
it definitely is on the more thinky side of the genre.
No, that's let that simmer. That's an interesting idea because they're good characters.
We'll call you back in 5 years.
There you go. Yeah, please do. Yeah, I'll start putting down notes. That's what I do. That's pretty interesting. Yeah, you planted the seed, maybe. Let me think about that. Yeah, yeah.
There we go. There we go.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
How I was gonna ask, do you have any specific process of coming up with names for these people? Because across, I've only read your Sonya's, the first 4 ones. I've actually got Oron
Mhm.
now. I've got my
Okay.
hands on it, and Lofty Towers. But uh, like, do you have a way to come up with the names? Because they're very varied. If you look at Hanlin, it can very well, like, it's either a hero or a guidance counselor. It can work for. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. It's
No,
it's
no,
Mr.
I
Hanlin.
understand.
In the
It's
office,
kind of
or
a
it's Hanlin with a sword. Yeah, and Thorim is
yeah,
a mythical hero. Leaning into
right.
mythology, and Ardodan can again be anything from like a mercenary to stomach burn medicine. It's like it's very
Yeah,
wide.
yeah. I hear- I don't know. The only answer I have is I try to stay away from the deliberately like goofy ones. I mean, I
Hmm.
don't want to name a barbarian hero Grunt or Gruntor, so I'm exaggerating. I mean, it's got to feel like it's something that would have been real in some historical epic. You know,
Right, right,
um, I know in a believe it or not, there's Akram is one of my characters, and I learned much later that's a honest to God bona fide name in the Middle East. In the Arabic culture. So I picked it up somewhere, maybe from early Robert E. Howard, and maybe from National Geographic. But in one of the Akram stories, I went back because I like reading about history and ancient history, and took some stuff from ancient Sumerian. Go
hmm,
online, you look up ancient Sumeria, and they got a dictionary and stuff. And those names are profoundly different from the way that we speak and think today. This is 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, with very syllabic, kind of thing. They do syllable syllable. So I got some interesting ideas out of that, for names of characters. But basically, it's like um, I, I will type stuff out just randomly. If I make a typo, it's like, oh, I could turn that into a name. But it should just sound like it's really um, it really could be somebody's name. Ardodan could be Professor Ardodan, of Miskatonic University or something. Who
yeah,
knows.
exactly,
But
exactly.
yeah, as long as it
Right,
sounds pretty good.
right, right, right. Do you tend to rank? I mean, you probably do, but where would you rank Hanlin and Lofty Towers in your preference of the enormous amount of stuff you've written? Do you have a favorite character or a favorite book? Beside the fact that you obviously have an emotional connection with this one, that's very,
Sure, sure.
important.
Yeah, and Hanlon's right up there. Um, uh, the actress in the situation in the historical novel about silent movies,
Hmm.
feel very close to her. Um, because I put
Well,
so much into it.
what's that called? I don't think you've mentioned it.
Oh, it's called Bright Star,
Red Star.
and
Okay.
it's on Amazon, and Paul Europe has put it out. Bright Star. Um, Catherine Farr is her name, and she's a country girl from Palatine and ends up going to the big city, and she's gorgeous and very intelligent, and they pluck her out of the lineup to act in some movies, and lo and behold, she's really good at it. And a lot of the early movie making, like back in the 19 teens, almost half of them were actually made by women in this country. Um, and their pictures tended to be about social progress, social progress, give women the vote, educate immigrants, child safety, child labor thing. They were very conscientious, about the country was exploding, in technology and industry and everything. Um, but then they made a lot of comedies too. But it's interesting period because there were so many women in all aspects of the industry, and that changed once everything settled in Hollywood, and guys frankly ran everything. And so women like Frances Marion and Anita Luth and a lot of these women ended up becoming script writers or doing other, or just dropped out of the business, which is really a shame because you're losing, some interesting voices there.
Hmm.
So my character actually disappears. We don't know how. Was she murdered? What happened? When she's getting on a train in 1920 to go to Hollywood to start trying to make pictures there. But I feel very close to her, and I like that period in American history a lot. So the Fall of the First World, the fantasy trilogy that I did, I really like the characters in that. Um, it was brought up by Pinnacle in '83. John Betancourt of Wildside has reprinted it, and again, it's like quasi historical. I made use of ideas like um, the Crusades. There's a imperial city that is like shared by both cultures, the people from the east and the people from the west, and we follow characters on both sides. Big book. There's a lot of philosophy in it and that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's a character there named Count Adred, whom actually I got the idea for him from War and Peace. The Pierre, if you ever read War and Peace or seen a movie or something, the Pierre Betzukov character, thinking person, so he inspired that character. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, I like Oron a lot. I've written a lot about him. He is a real character to me at this point. He's like an older uncle or something, it's like who's done all this stuff. Akram is just a brawler. He's a handler, it's like, be careful around him, he's got a temper and stuff. Plus he's quasi immortal. I got cursed by a witch. So now he's wandering around until he can finally die, so that would affect the guy's temper,
Yeah, that's always fun.
Yeah, it is. So I have fun with that.
So,
Is that your notebook full
noticed-
of questions?
He's got about 20
it's
odd pages.
a new notebook that I just got when I
Oh,
was on
good.
vacation in
Yeah,
Michigan.
I'd like to be
So,
here.
Chapter 1, verse 1.
I know that. I know what that means.
so with this story, how did like Beyond the Black River, Howard's story, kind of like influence the setting of this and like the character of Hanlon? Because you can see kind of some parallels between the two stories.
Yeah, you can. I really like that story a lot. I mean, it's, what do you want to say, the most mature or whatever you want to call it, in the Howard canon, as he said, I think Clyde Smith and one of his friends, that Farnsworth where he bought it, and there's not a naked girl in it, didn't get a cover, but there are traces in that story of what my dad used to call Easterns, where it's like Revolutionary War period or whatever in this country, and then before moving out to the Great Plains and moving farther west. And we know that Howard had read one novel, I forget the author's popular novel, and it felt that way to me when I read it. And I'm from Ohio, and I grew up around woods and stuff in Pennsylvania and Ohio, so that aspect of it felt very real to me. The other aspect that really spoke up to me, and Oliver and I talked about this, is my being kind of like on the side of the underdog in a lot of things. And I told him that's just the way I was raised. I mean, it's my parents. They equality. It's like try to be fair and everything. But there is that aspect to the Picts, Conan and the Picts there. I mean, he's got a job to do and he does it, but he doesn't hate the Picts or anything. They're there. They're like spiders. I mean, what are you gonna do? And they're as good at what they do as he is at his, and maybe better. Like another story. So that aspect of the clash of the cultures, it echoes what I did in Fall of the First World, but in this story I deal with it again, in this very specific way. So it was always in the back of my mind as I wrote this story. Yeah.
Right. I think that makes sense too about how you said that where you're from, like rural Ohio, you kind of like feel more into the setting of that. Because I'm from rural West Virginia, so
there you go. You understand.
Yeah, Beyond the Black River has always been one of my favorite Conan tales. And so like the concept in this story, kind of like with the American West, with like the white man befriending and helping the natives, all of that.
Mhm.
To me, I could almost picture Hanlon as being like an ultra violent version of like the Lone Ranger, um,
Ah,
because
interesting. Yeah.
where he, like the canyon story of the betrayal, like that happens with the Lone
Yeah.
Ranger. He makes
Right. Yeah.
friends
Yeah.
with Tonto and all of that. Um, and then it also made me think of like, have you ever read like the Louis L'Amour Sackett novels?
I have not. I've read some Louis L'Amour. I haven't read those. Yeah.
So the
Okay.
Sackett novels, one of them in particular, like Jubal Sackett, to me kind of
Uh
felt
huh.
similar to this, because Jubal's a
Okay.
white man who kind of ends up living with the Indians. Um,
Uh huh.
and so I just was wondering, like, how much like Western influence was there in this story? Because it feels very, cowboys and Indians kind of thing, but with swords and sorcery.
Yeah. No, it's very much there. And when I as I grew up, I never was interested very much in westerns. I mean, go figure. I mean, just I was like science fiction and monsters and tarantulas and stuff. Universal horror movies. But as I got older, it's like, wow, there's a lot of things going on here, in westerns. So I still haven't caught up with the reading I need to do of westerns. Um, James Reasoner writes well, I know him, so I've read a number of his novels down in Texas. Um, but movies, because I thought I would start out as a filmmaker and I love movies, I paid attention to those. So that if there's any sense of that depth or sweep of stuff going on in this, it likely comes from my appreciation of Western movies. I would say rather than the written stuff, at this point. Um, the Searchers and movies like that. There was some inexpensive. There was a director called Bud Bettinger, and he would make movies on the cheap. He just, oh, let's put the camera over there, and he made 5 or 6 movies in the 50s with Randolph Scott, and these things these things are sword and sorcery stories. I mean, it's a Western plot, and there's situations, where Randolph Scott gets in trouble and has got to deal with, Richard Boone or some bad guy, or the woman's in trouble in town or whatever. Um, 7 Men from Now. There's a bunch of others. But if you look him up, if you haven't, you know, seen these, or if they don't ring a bell, Boetticer, I think, and they're kind of psychological and stuff. They're really good. Um, and Randall Scott has just pulled himself through these things like he's an old gunslinger. He understands everything there is to know about surviving in the West. He's done everything, and so he gets put in these situations, and they're just good. They're just good, tight little movies. They're character driven. Which I guess is the way I approach Sword and Sorcery now. Um, very much so. But yeah, Bud Bettinger. I like those. I think of those a lot when I think of Sword.
Yeah, I'll have to watch those. I've not seen those. I've seen a bunch of
Yeah,
them.
I mean, 7 Men. Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other titles. 7 Men from Now is one. Um, in Indians, he's bushwhacked, and Indians take a horse or something. It opens when he's walking to a campfire with some guys. What happened to your horse? Well, the Indians ate him. And so you immediately, this is a very different situation from the Lone Ranger. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there it is.
Different target audience.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallel between westerns and sword and sorcery. Now that I think about it, I've never thought about it
Yeah.
for some reason, but
Okay.
This book made
It,
me think about it.
Mhm.
So
oh, good. You know what? Good, because I've carried that around for a while now, and I know some who Don Heron, I think, has compared them to like sword and sorcery genre to the detective genre, the hard boiled genre.
the noir.
And of course they occurred, yeah, noir and everything. And he's not wrong. This all came out of the American Depression, and that experience and stuff. But I think because Howard was a Texan, and because of size of the mythology in Sword and Sorcery. You know, it's not constrained to city streets and rooms and buildings and stuff. I mean, it tends to be outside a lot, and that's where we have the heroes, that we recognize, the Agamemnons, the Odysseus's, and these people. And I think of those in terms of, they contribute a lot to the mystique of the Western, in that kind of storytelling. Yeah, to me, it's kind of a natural fit, just sword instead of a gun.
Yeah, it's
Really.
people who dare to brave the wilds in one capacity or another, basically.
Yeah, you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
The good sword and sorcery. I mean, we know the characters are outsiders, and some of them are. I think this book I'm reading, I call them like they can be good bad men or bad good men. That phrase goes all the way back to movies in the 20s. And William S. Hart made westerns, and these guys would be on the wrong side of the law, but they would do the right thing to help a woman and her baby or something. They were enormously popular before westerns became kind of kid shows. With Tom Mix. But yeah, we know that's who they are, and so they're always going to be outsiders. I lost my train of thought of that. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
But no, the point is that that it's it's in that very open, mythic environment with these characters.
Well, you mentioned horror movies and being a fan of them.
Mhm.
I was wondering if that's why you chose to basically put in a lot of essentially explicit, gory descriptions of various scenes and happenings,
Yeah,
so to speak, in the book.
I see. That comes. I mean, Howard started to do that. When I think of horror movies, you'll laugh at me, but I go back to the stuff in the 30s and 40s. The gothic stuff to me. I know horror is much more explicit now and everything, and that's okay. I've seen them and everything. Where the gore comes from in my stories is, I would think, from the reality of combat, which thank God I've never been in a serious sword fight with anybody. But go back to Homer, go back to the Viking sagas. Go back to the idea that you're all alone and the weapon you have is an edged sword. I did take some classes in Korean sword play, so I know a little bit about doing this kind of stuff. But that's where it comes from, that very intimate, closeness that you would get from one-on-one fighting, which changed once we got firearms and you could kill at a distance. So this makes it more explicit, and there is a kind of horror to it. I would think, most of us haven't. I mean, thank goodness, I suppose, experienced raw warfare and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One of my uncles did, and it changed his whole life. Um, the gore that he saw in combat. But that's where it comes from more, is thinking about that one-on-one combat, and when fighting was done with edged weapons. That's rather than like the influence of modern horror stories. So,
Yeah, I think I saw some of that through, for instance, in your description that when Anine comes back to the camp to lay the trap for Sel, and you describe how she sees like a few dozen people with basically amputees and lost eyes, lost fingers, basically hurt people, and also the fresh graves and all of that, and that did instantly remind me of more modern warfare.
Casualties.
Yes, casualties and the scenes describing them, so to speak. I saw a parallel there.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah,
that
thank you.
scene
Yeah, no, that's
made me think of, like, I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Gettysburg. It's about the Civil War. That scene when they're in the Confederate camp after one of the battles of that day, and there's just all these amputees and surgeons walking around and stuff. That's what it made me think of.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also World War II movies. Every time they come back from a certain skirmish or other, and they go back to camp,
Mhm.
and the trucks are coming in with wounded, and they're depositing
Exactly.
them on the floor, and there's not enough room in the first aid tents, and
That's right.
yeah, so it's
That's
that kind of
right.
stuff.
It's something so visceral. I'm glad that in the modern world most of us don't have to experience that. I don't think it's good for us to experience that. I think that there are probably mostly males, but not always, those of us who really are warriors, and they're kind of born to that, you know. And I don't know if they become inured to that or they accept it. That's their worldview, you know, like a lion, you know, attacking something that's just the way the world is. Um, but for most of us, you know, human history, we've just been sociable creatures, making us some fist fight, but we tend to help each other in communities and stuff. And um, that warrior class had to be trained to do that. You know, there would have been some whatever culture just adept at it. You know, I mean, they were just good at being a warrior, and it came to them. But others had to be trained, you know, to do that. Like you'd be trained to be a farmer or work iron or you know poetry or whatever. So it does run very deep in us. I think about that a lot. You know, is war our home? The Greeks kind of thought that. I mean, is that the natural state of mankind? Just being in war and being prepared for war, you know, against our neighbors and stuff.
Well,
I'd like to think not.
it's very interesting that you say
But
that. I would think the Greeks didn't think that so much, but the Romans did rather. As their whole political system revolved around war. Meanwhile,
exactly,
the
exactly.
Greeks came up with democracy, which was weird and fucked up, but democracy nonetheless.
But then the Spartans, you hear the Spartans in that culture, you know.
Yes, but
So
they were kind of the standout in the Greek culture.
very much so, very much so. Yeah, they were singular. But yeah, Rome, everything was around. Um, what would you serve? 20 years, I think you would serve in the Roman army.
Yeah, it
That's
was a
that's a
long,
long time, I would
long,
think. I don't.
long time.
Was it?
Half your life, or even
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna
Um,
say, I think it hasn't war been a reality for humanity for longer than it's not, like from tribal times
I
through
think
ancient
so.
history, and I think
Yeah, I think so.
I think we've lost um the notion of what that is. Like as you were saying before, because we haven't been involved in
Hmm.
something like Hanlon and Thorim have been involved. And I think
Right.
there could have been a benefit to people, at least if not seeing combat, at least serving. I'm 32. I would have been interested to join the army back when I was like now looking back. I think
Hmm.
I might have benefited from.
Hmm.
It's like a year or two. What is it in Romania? If they like 1 year,
Yeah.
I think.
It depends on whether you do college or not. If you don't do college, it's 1 year. If you do college, it's 6 months, I think, something like that.
So it's it won't
Mm.
put your life on hold forever, but it will give you some perspective.
Right.
So I think it benefited many people who might have been warriors at heart, but haven't gone in that direction, and they're taking that war and that
Mm.
rage into something else, and maybe not doing so well with it because they haven't, leaned that way when maybe they should have. Again, going back to
They didn't have an
Hanlon's
outlet for
rage,
it.
and yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. You know, we're in Chicago, and there's a lot of guys primarily, you know, on the south side. They got nothing.
Hmm.
I mean, what are they gonna do with their time? You know, they've been shoveled away there and everything. That's where. Well, I go back to the eternal question in society: what do you do with the young men? And I just keep thinking about that because there's in most societies there's a way for girls, young women, to be shepherded into womanhood. You know, by the elders around them and their moms and aunts and whatever in the community. And for boys in some cultures that's true as well. You know, if you grow up on a farm, you learn to use tools, you learn to do this, you learn to do that. Um, but not always. There's always going to be some people who don't fit in or whatever. Um, you know, I've said for a long time, if you make sure that every guy out there, you know, get them married, they get laid regularly, okay, have them a family, you know, they got the responsibility. homosexuality, give them a night out with the boys, all right, and you've got a pretty solid citizen. And women would have a similar thing, you know. It doesn't take a lot, but everybody has to feel they have a place in things, you know. And yeah, for the guys who are full of rage and anger, we can help you channel that. In you know, there's I keep going back to this. So I don't know what culture it was. They like drag you off the street. You know, you're going to be a priest. You're going to be a warrior. You're going to go study somewhere. You know, but something has to be done to channel that, and much good can come of it. But otherwise, you know, you're just hanging out doing nothing, getting in trouble, making trouble for the rest of us. And there's a lot of lost talent and opportunity there. You know,
Yeah.
In this country, we don't national service, and I'd be the first to vote for something like that. 'Cause I was going to get drafted. My 2S deferment in 72, 73. It didn't make it through the mail. It got lost in the mail. So I got a card in the mail saying you got to go for your physical in Warren, Ohio. You know, I'm not going to. I don't. This is the Vietnam era. You know,
Right.
and my dad fought in World War II, but he wasn't so sure he wanted his kid fighting. You know, this war for DuPont Corporation and stuff.
Yeah.
As it
Probably a
turned
good
out, it was
idea.
war effort. Yeah, I think probably a good idea. You know, but I thought about that since it's like, man, if they give me a choice, you know, I mean, I've got a lot of imagination and that kind of stuff, but I'm not really in a warrior mold. Um, but I go into national service doing something for a year or two. I'd be happy to do that. Take a year or two off, help your country, help your state. You know, become a better citizen. You know, you're not just thinking about yourself all the time. You know, you're part of something bigger. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I wound up being a writer.
My dad and I have talked about that before, where
Yeah.
like, you know, some countries have that like you mandatory service, like how Israel has that.
Yes.
And how
Yes.
like
Yes.
it might benefit Americans if we actually had that here.
I think so. I think so.
Yeah.
There's also going back to
We're really.
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Going back to what you were saying about responsibility and sort of civilizing the savage, you can look at Thorum and Hanlin, who, you know, going into multiple spoilers we have already for the book. Spoilers, by the way, spoiler warnings.
We
An
have
hour and
already.
whatever in, yeah. But
Yeah, I know.
you can look at Thorum, who kept being a warrior throughout his life, and you could argue it was his undoing by the end. Whereas Hanlin saw that there was something more beyond it. You know, he had his share of fighting. He
Mhm.
saw what was on, you know, on the other side of war, and he chose
Mhm.
that life. He settled down twice, and you know,
Yeah.
he went back to being a warrior because you know, the situation required it. But I guess his long-term vision was always to settle down. And you had the quote that you were talking about earlier, is what is wisdom? To be content with life and accept it, despite everything we confront in life. So there's power in that quote, and it's very difficult for men, or at least speaking for myself, to know when you have to be content with the next step in your life and accept that next step and work towards it, not against it. You know, it's taken me
Yeah,
like
that
a kid and a
quote comes
half.
directly from my life. Man.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can definitely see that. So it's taken me a kid and a half
Yeah.
to accept this next this next step, as it were.
Yeah.
So I'm on 2 now. I'm fine. I'm
I didn't. No, I think it's wonderful, man. I think I told you we didn't have a child. I was married before, and my wife's 14 years younger than I am. And man, you don't think that upsets some people? What the hell, you know? Um, it worked out perfectly. We're just fine with each other, you know.
that's
But it
great.
turns
That's
out
great.
that I always wanted a daughter. I got a daughter, but I was 53 when she was born, you know. So I mean, she's wonderful and everything, but yeah, it's a whole. It changed me, you know, much for the. There's this joke because I was a medical editor and I was the managing editor of the Journal of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery, and it's published out here in the suburbs. So it's, it's a job. I mean, I'm doing stuff all day long and everything, and I'm a supervisor, and I'm not giving orders, but giving direction, doing that kind of stuff. So but Lily is bored, and I mean, within weeks, these women I work with are like, "Oh, you're a changed man. You're better than we we all went out for lunch one time, and Charlie Baldwin, this young guy who worked there, I really like him a lot, and we're talking just about stuff and everything, and I said to him, if you may be surprised to learn this, but I was kind of an asshole before Lily was born. He said, "No, I don't find it hard to believe at all." Great.
That's so great. Uh, the uh, I was gonna say
Doing my job.
as I was reading
Oh my.
the scene near the end with Hanlon stepping in and helping the Kiranji woman with the sick child. Um, I didn't
Yeah.
know anything about
Yeah.
you personally at that point. I hadn't reached the interview. I hadn't watched the stream that you did with Oliver a
Oh,
little
sure. Yeah.
earlier this
Yeah.
week. And
Yeah.
as soon as I saw that scene, I'm like, David must be a girl dad. Like that's a girl dad who wrote that.
Oh, there
Definitely.
you
Like
go. Yeah.
that was the point where I'm like, yeah, he's
There
got a
you
girl. He's
go.
definitely got a girl.
It's definitely true, and it's like, I wanted a girl. A friend of mine in Cleveland, my pal who also writes, he's talking about his daughter, and at that time she was 16, and it's like, oh, I can't do anything right, but, it's true. But he said it's the closest we're ever gonna get, like really like understanding or seeing into womanhood and the feminine and everything, and it's a worthwhile thing to learn and to think about. So and he's right. He's absolutely right.
Cam, you were gonna check your notes some more.
Uh,
You have another question, sir?
yeah. So, kind of, you mentioned this a little bit in this, where somewhere in here that we talked about like, the whole concept of like
Mhm.
civilization versus barbarism. Like, what is the natural state of the world? Um,
Sure.
which do you think it is? Like, are you on the side of the barbarism or the civilization?
That's a really good question, and of course Howard wrestled with it too. Um, I myself, as uncomfortable as I am with a lot of aspects of civilization and the jerks that are in it, um, I would say a good settled life with the amenities of civilization. That's the best. Now I was born in 1952, and I could have died a couple of times. I was kept alive because of modern medicine back then. So I have to think about that. Um, but the attraction, not of Howard's circle on this is that civilized societies eventually go to hell. We may be seeing that now.
Yeah.
And then they decline into savagery and stuff. Which maybe savagery isn't the right word, but you gotta you whatever you want to call it, hunter gatherer societies or savage things don't work, whatever, and then they find their way up toward barbarism again, which my way of thinking what kind of meant was kind of like the frontier, wherever it is. You're free to breathe clean air. Other people can tell you what to do. You farm your own land, or you run your own little business. And I where I grew up, I mean that's really nice. My dad and I would go into the bait shop and buy worms to go fishing, and stuff. That seems like a really good thing as long as the people all agree to that. They're as fair as possible, which in the 50s and 60s, that wasn't the case. But so that it's as equitable as possible for everybody, and that to me would be a kind of civilization. Um, but not always. I keep going back to this idea. I don't know if it's been disproven. Um, I bought the book by the guy. I got to find it. I had to box up a bunch of books for a reason. Um, his idea that the early hunter-gatherer societies, that's kind of like the best life you could live. Now, the birth rate death might be high, but people got along. They lived off the land. Everything, you only took what you needed. You planted other stuff, or you traveled around. That's best for us and Mother Nature and everybody. And once you start getting cities which are settled, um, there's a lot of good that comes from that. You know, you can raise your own cattle and goats, and you can have organized religion or organized whatever and that kind of stuff. But it starts this hierarchy of people who are going to tell you what to do, you know, take things from you, demand stuff. What are you getting back? And if one has a sense of oneself, that's really, you know, that's hard to swallow. Um, Maybe most people just go along with it to get along. I guess it's the kind of temperament that you are. I guess I'm an individual, and you know, I've always got a little bit of handling of my dad in me. I guess, you know, um, just leave me alone. I want to do what I want to do, you know. And there should be room for people like that in a good society. And usually, even in a small town, there is. You know,
Yeah.
I would be the small town crank or something
Yeah.
like that. But you know, they're all part of the same
It's
structure.
basically about balance.
I guess that's maybe the Weasley answer, but yeah, unbalanced, exactly. So that's good. I mean, I don't think there's ever a perfect childhood, but mine was pretty good when I look back. You know, growing up, you know, there's a lot of fields. Eric Sattler and me to walk through, you know, and just you know pull around out in the woods and you know go fishing or explore. We go exploring, you know. And when I was really young, we'd find blackberry bushes and raspberry bushes and pick them and sell them for a dime a box. And you know, it's like Mayberry or something. You know, I mean, it was like, but it was really a good life. And um, you know, I followed the astronauts, and you know, school was interesting in some ways. It's just it's too bad everyone can't have that. I mean, it wasn't perfect by any means, you know, but it's like it was equitable enough, and it'd be nice if everybody kind of had an access to that to help find out who you are by the time you start maturing. You know,
Yeah.
That's a
I
great
guess
point.
that's
Yeah.
yeah,
I only have one more question. And
that's fine. Yeah, that's good. We've been at this for about an hour,
Yeah.
a little more than an hour. Yeah.
We're good.
have you ever like made a map of this world that Hanlon is part of? Because I am a geography nut. I love maps, and I would love to
Oh wow.
see this world mapped out.
I made a map of Attluma. In fact, I got a bulletin board here. Let me see if I can take this off. My wife drew this beautiful map for when Oron was reprinted by Wildside Press. So this goes back to like 77,
Wow.
78.
That's gorgeous.
And this is the island continent of Attluma. Yeah. Um, and originally I thought, well, it'll be in the Pacific or something, you know, like Lemuria. You know, and it kind of became in the Atlantic. But this is my Hyborian era, you know. And now I never specifically state where Hanlon is in. This is huge, you know, where this map is, but probably somewhere along the middle, um, and toward the west over here, you know, because this is all pretty rough stuff. And he'd be from Nevga, which is up here, the Nevga frontier, which I got the name from the river Neva or Neva in Russia, and I just put a G in it, you know. But that's the only map I have. I suppose I could have drawn one for where he is. To me, it's a frontier town. You know, it's just um, the what's over there, what's to the west. You know, is just eventually it ends. I like what I did with it in there. You know, kind of go up in the mountains, and then it's kind of like the end of the world there. You come down to the seashore, I suppose.
So your map there. So are you saying
Sorry.
that like
Yeah.
all of your like fantasy sword and sorcery stories are like in the same world at different
Yeah.
times?
Yeah, they all fit in here. Yeah, they all fit in here. There's a timeline to this. If you ever pick up a copy of Oron, you can probably still find the paperback for $2, I hope. I noticed some of those old paperbacks of mine now, they're asking a lot of money. And it's like, man, oh man, you know, it's like just let somebody buy it and read it. You know, but I found a copy of Oron years ago, and I had to pay $10 for it at half price books or something, you know. And the Sonjas now they're asking a lot of money because they've never been
Yeah.
reprinted. But
Thankfully, I have those.
yeah,
I have those in
so
paperback, the Sonias. So
good, good. But yeah, all the story, the first short stories, the first ones that I wrote, And some of them are pretty wackadoodle fantasies. But at some point, I figured they all fit in here, you know. And the stories differ enough that some of them the situations are kind of primitive and everything. That's probably early in the history. And I put them all together in a book called Tales of Attluma. I originally wrote a lot of these for the fanzine back in the day in the 70s, and then I tightened some of them up and cleaned them up a little bit too. I completely rewrote because I didn't like them originally. But that people like that book a lot, and it kind of follows the trail. You know, the timeline of the early ones are kind of more primitive or weirder or something, and then as you get to the ones at the end, they're character driven. The deal with Attluma, um, in my vision, is that it was created by demons. It's always been kind of a dark land. Humans are interfering with it. There are gods and everything, but the idea is that even though the first hero of the country says Attluma means it was given to us, the humans, well, kind of. They got to fight, you know, these evil forces for it. So we're always being the intruders on their space. It's like the opposite of the book of Genesis or something. You know, we're given this land, we're taking it from them because we feel we can do better. But that's kind of a dark thing for human beings to do anyway. So even though they have great civilizations and big cities and everything, the dark forces at the edge always want to take them back, and eventually they will. And so you see that arc then, that storyline in Tales of Attluma and some of the later stories, you see that happening.
Where
I didn't originally envision it that way, but as I wrote these stories, I thought, yeah, we're the dark things. They really want this place. You know, it's basically theirs.
well, this brings to mind another question. Where would you say the Kirangi stand in on this, on the relationship with those demonic forces, considering
So the demonic forces,
do they use them or?
I would say no, because the dark forces, they could call upon them if they wanted to, I suppose. But the dark forces periodically are kind of like pushed back, buried underground. They hide out somewhere. In the mythology of this place, there's a character who becomes the Nakha. It's just a made-up word. Becomes a hero for the continent. There was an early one who fought for the continent, defeated the evil thing. Humanity has a couple thousand years to do what it wants to do. Then the evil ones try to come back, and there are sorcerers who try to bring them back into power for their own benefit. So this Manichaean aspect, I guess, is always there, but I hate the idea of just pure good and evil because that simplifies the world too much. But there are things that are inimical to us, you know. So we might want to call them evil because, you know, I don't like that bacteria. It's evil or something, you know. So Oron, the character Oron, the first real sword and sorcery novel I wrote, is the Nakha. He's was born and he's kind of been chosen to be this warrior who's going to help free the continent from evil, and he does so. But it continues on for 1,000 years or more after him. But eventually, this contraction, you know, whatever is going to occur again, and so these demonic forces try again, and they do eventually bring down the end of the world. You know, I mean, they destroy Attluma, and that's what they do, and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And I guess that's where they want to be, because they're still down there, you know. But that's the mythology behind a lot of this. Yeah. As I continue to, I'm sorry.
Is
Go ahead,
Luma
please.
from the Latin light, or what's the?
You know, I studied a little Latin. The title is Attluma. So in my subconscious, it might be, huh? Luminous, Luma.
Like lumen
Yeah,
is
that
light.
it's exactly, and because human beings have brought the light. You know, it's like 73 years. I never thought of that. Thank you. Yeah.
Glad I could be of
Appreciate that.
assistance to the great David C. Smith.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew what I was doing. It subconsciously, you know, I knew what I was doing. Yeah, happy accident. So But see, that's one of the cool things about creating art, or like writing stuff and publishing stuff, is that I mean, it's not all mine. I mean, you give it to a readership. You got an equal voice. In your say about this. What you think of it and where you want to go with it and stuff. I mean, it's out there
Mm.
now. So and
Don't tell that to
that's
J.R.R.
good.
Martin.
I've had some people on YouTube say, yeah, people on YouTube.
I'm sorry.
What's that?
I
Sorry,
said
go ahead.
don't tell that to J.R.R. Martin.
I know. Well, he's a whole different case, man. It's like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to make of these big superstar guys. I thought when I started out, I thought, I want to be a big superstar guy, be a writer, basically just make a living. I really don't want to be a celebrity. I just want to make a living. So it never works out the way you want it to. But in America, it's like you're no success, or you're very modest success, or it's just incredible. There's no middle ground, and there used to be in the pulp days. Those guys made a decent living, right? I knew some of the writers. I knew some of the old science fiction writers. They did just fine, doing that. And when I was a kid in the mid '60s, I'd look at the book rack at the drugstore, and it's like, man, they're making a living writing these stories. That must really be cool. But everything changes, everything does, and the situation we have now, I think, is too bad. The big publishers in New York are just publishing grinding the same stuff out over and over again. It's the people on the margins here who are really doing good work. It's the scrappy writer is writing Sword Sorcery, and we are, because we're writing honest stuff, and we're not being paid for it, not being paid enough, but we do it because we love it, and it's creativity and it's our art. And to me, that's the best. It'd be nice if I could make a living doing this, and I tried it, and it would have been compromised. I mean, I didn't think of it that way then, but it's like, yeah, I mean, I published all those books just because I was one lucky dude, that I got to write what I love, and it worked out for a while, because of the markets. But everything's the markets and what sells stuff. And I don't think I would have been able to adapt to just being a writer, a freelance writer like that, turning out all kinds of books, because my heart wouldn't have been in it. And I guess I'm just not enough of a person who can say, forget about that, just write the story. If my name's going on it, I want it to be worth something, and somebody who buys it to get their money's worth. So it's just the way I'm made.
Oh, you mean you have integrity?
I'm still writing.
Yes.
Yeah. There you go. When people think of Dave Smith, they think of integrity. Yes. Thank you. No, that's true.
It's nice that there are still people like you still active in the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's a good time for people to find out about this stuff. Like the podcast we started basically stemmed out of me running into a sword and sorcery RPG called Barbarians of Lemuria that was based on Lynn Carter's Lemuria. So we just went from there. I didn't know about Thongor. I knew my Howard and my classic stuff, sword and sorcery, but and we discovered this whole world, like you said, with Discord, with zines and publications and open submissions that weren't stuffy and weren't looking for everything to be in like standard Metascript format and stuff. And it's really refreshing to be able to connect directly with authors through this medium and see the crowdfunding campaigns pop up without like major publishing houses and getting stuff to the backers, like everything.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. I was just going to mention the book I'm working on now. It's just about done. I think I mentioned it to you. It's the title is called Call the Thrones and Arcane Arts. Writing Sword and Sorcery. And the first part of the title comes from some phrases in a story of Dick Tierney's of Simon of Gitta, and it kind of works. I'm just about done with it. It's long, about 80,000 words. But I want to say that the guy Bob at Paul Hero Press gave me the idea. He said, "No, I think you came up with it, so we don't know." But I've been working at it off and on for years. There's so much stuff now. There's no way you can deal with it all. Well, what I'm doing is talking about the writing aspect, so that I'll deal there's some background information, on where the genre came from, but then character and how you do character and what dealing with characterization, theme, all this kind of stuff. And I'm finding stories that really nicely exhibit these elements of storytelling, So can't fit everybody in, but there's some good example stuff in there. And some of it is just straight out action. It's just all fun, and you read it for the enjoyment of it. And I found some writers out there that are really they're doing literary quality work, you know, and we're seeing that now, with the resurgence of the genre. A lot of the writers are really writing stuff that's top drawer, it's just great. So that's what I'm working on now. And I started talking about this because I remember now, when I wrap it up at the end, I wanted to kind of summarize stuff. And tell me what you think of this. I thought of this metaphor. It's like it's ripples in a pond. So you got Robert E. Howard drops like a stone or a sword or something into a pond, and the ripples start to come out. And the first ripples are the people who wrote Sword and Sorcery immediately after him, you know. And then there's the next ripple, which probably be like Fritz Leiber, and Fafford and Ray Mouser. And then after him, there was kind of this fantastic magazine and John Jakes, and then started getting anthologies and so this is in the section on New Age Sword and Sorcery, and that's just the latest ripple. It's kind of like westerns, expanded and grew from their original, their origin in pulp fiction, and detective stories did that, romance stories did that, and so this genre is doing that. It's growing and expanding, and that's a good thing. We want that. We want different types of characters and different types of situations, and I'll always be a fan of a guy grabbing a sword and going to fight something or other. But think how many different ways you can take that. Like the many different ways you can take a gunslinger,
Yeah.
or a detective, or a romantic setting, and we can do it. And writers are doing it now, and it's a grand thing, and we get to be here with it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's one of
So
one of the cyclical
Yeah.
things in media and with westerns as well. I think they're on a resurgence now, especially with
Mhm.
everything going
Yeah.
on with I'm blanking on the name, but the guy that did Yellowstone and all of that adjacent.
Or the writer,
There we go, Sheridan. Yeah,
Taylor
I
Sheridan,
think
the writer.
what he's doing, Sheridan's amazing.
Yeah,
He seems
Sheridan.
like
Yeah.
a great guy that knows, the mythos. He knows the mythos. He knows
Yes.
what he's trying to do, and he's doing it. He's
Exactly.
doing it really, really
Exactly.
well with everything that he's
Mhm.
come up with so far. The wife and I love Yellowstone. It's
Yep.
it's what got her into westerns. She wasn't into westerns
Yep.
until she saw
Oh,
Yellowstone,
wow.
and I'm like, no, this
Yeah.
is like we're watching a western. It's modern, but it's got the same
Oh,
trappings
yeah.
of the genre. And
Right.
the ripples example
Exactly.
is great as well, because I think you run the risk of um, sure, the first stone was thrown by Howard, and the ripples are the further, the
Mhm.
people that take inspiration from that. But if you stop
Mhm.
throwing stones into the
Mhm.
pond, eventually the ripples die down. So
Uh,
I think so.
Good
If you're
point.
looking
Good
at it
point.
from the Western standpoint, there were the original iterations and the Lone Rangers
Mhm.
and the spaghetti westerns and Clint Eastwood and all of that, and then it stopped for
Mhm.
decades. And yeah, and I
Well,
think
it did.
Sheridan's dropping like this
Yeah.
big pile of stones right now, and hopefully it'll keep going. And I think it's
Yep.
the same with Sword and Sorcery, with people dropping small pebbles now
Yeah.
with the indie writers, and you know.
There you
So
go. I like
I
that.
think that's a
I
great
like that. Um.
great metaphor with a pond.
Thanks. Yeah. I wanted to tie it up at the end of this book. So, and that seemed to capture it.
Hmm.
What I was going at. So. Yeah, I'm hoping it'll be out by the end of the year. I'm just about done now. I'm going to send the manuscript, well,
Yeah,
manuscripts, the Word doc, to some folks, get some reaction, see if they think I'm on the right
we.
track. Maybe argue with some stuff
I was gonna
because
say,
what's that? You have an
I mean,
email address?
you have my email address if you want to
I'll send
throw
it
it
to
my
you.
way. We'd
That's
love
okay. I will
to
send.
read anything you have to say on the matter. I'm pretty sure I speak for all of
Absolutely.
us.
Let me.
Yes, yeah.
Excellent, man. I will send it to you. You pass it
Definitely,
around to these guys,
definitely.
and we'll get some feedback. And if you don't agree with everything I say, that's fine. You can't hurt my feelings. That's kind of the point. It keeps
Yeah,
the
yeah.
discussion going, and that keeps the genre alive. Doing all this stuff. So give me a few more weeks, and should be there. It's big. It's a big book.
Awesome,
It's
awesome.
80,000 words. So
What is Lofty
yeah,
Towers? Is it
yeah,
like 65,000 or so?
yeah. Lofty Tower is 65
Yeah, yeah.
or 70, I think. Yeah. It's not huge. Yeah, it's not huge. People use these big stop books, and it's not what it is at all. I try to write as concisely and well as I can to get the point across. So, and one of my things about sword and sorcery stories largely is that there's really not what we think of as
Mm-hmm.
world building in them.
Yeah.
The world is there, just like we're here, and so you get what you need to know to fill it in your mind, but you contribute to it. The reader contributes to it with their imagination. So that's one of the things I like about the movie.
Yeah, it sort of focuses on certain
Yeah,
points but doesn't paint the whole map, as it were. Like it speaks of distant places,
exactly.
but it doesn't, measure miles or anything. It just goes, it's far away from
Right,
that, or it's far away
right.
from this. It's across that desert or something. And that's kind of where it's
Precisely.
at. And then you focus on the
That's
point where
exactly
you're
what,
in, which is, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and like the world, it
which is
it
which is
builds
why the story is there.
like
Yeah,
slowly and like off stage. It's the little drop here, the
precisely,
little drop there, and eventually, before you know it, you have the whole world. But it's
precisely.
just not just given to you.
Yeah,
It's not
Mhm.
like Tolkien dumping in
that's
an entire thing, which there's nothing wrong
right.
with that. I love Tolkien, but it's a very different thing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing. The term they use, I came across a woman. I'll think of her name. She
Hmm.
used the term immersive, and that's what it is. And there's another guy who's talking about science fiction, and it's like, do you want to be totally immersed in the thing or not? If you do, that's fine. But you're gonna kind of become part of this thing that you're gonna know every detail, and you're kind of like now you're almost like you've entered the pages, you're in another world. Or are you as a reader, like as a different stance, getting the clues you need to build the thing, and the emphasis is on something other than this immersive
Right.
experience, and it works both ways. I mean, it just depends. But Sword and Sorcery to me seems to, and I've written novels, but it really seems to have the most fun when it's in a shorter length, and it does what it needs to do, and then it gets out of there, and you're left, with your jaws agape or appreciative or going, I hate that
Yeah, it's
stuff, or whatever
condensed.
it is,
Yeah.
It's condensed.
So
And
yeah,
it's really difficult
it's condensed.
to condense something that's rewarding. I think more often than not, you're left
Yeah,
with a sense of wanting more, not necessarily because, oh, the story was so
you want
good,
more,
but because there's something missing from
right?
the, like, people try to distill that essence of Sword and Sorcery, but not, they don't necessarily get it every
Yeah,
time. But yeah.
they, I know, it's getting to be like a thing you got
Yeah.
to learn how to write, which is not bad, it's a good thing. But yeah, I'm thinking because I'm going down the list of the stories I talk about in the book, and some of them are just flat out, they're just enjoyable romps. You know, I mean, it's like you're there for the action and the
Hmm.
fun, if you want to call it that, and the storytelling, and it's a friend of mine, Fred Adams, writes New Pulp, and detective stuff and crime stuff and everything. This guy's a PhD. He wrote his thesis on Edith Wharton. He loves writing this stuff. He's not better than that. It's fun, and he does it well. And so it's as enjoyable as anything. And then sometimes you want another kind of story. And so there's all we can. It's like the ripples.
Yep.
We can have all kinds. We can have all kinds. So and that's the
Yeah.
best. That's the best.
All right. Efty, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I
One
don't
of
take
the
up all your
things I
time.
really
I
loved
guess.
about the sword and sorcery genre is how ad hoc collaborative it seems to be. A lot of authors enjoy,
Ah,
I wouldn't say riffing off of each other, not ripping off, riffing off, as in taking each
Hmm.
other's
yeah.
either
I agree.
characters or worlds or concepts and taking that further, which basically ends up with a common project eventually sometimes. Um,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
very interesting contrast with something like IP specific world building. For instance, if you know about the world of Warhammer or Star Wars, where you have multiple
right,
authors writing in the
right.
same IP, in the same universe,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
with a
Hmm.
usually common editor that comes in, checks that everything is
Right,
okay. The
And
right.
misses a
collaborative,
lot of stuff.
sometimes yes, like massively.
Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
there are some
Sounds like personal experience, but we don't have to go there. I don't,
there are some very good results and some very bad ones. But I guess you can say that about Sword and Sorcery
right,
books as well. There are some very good ones and some very bad ones.
of course, of
Hunger.
course.
Uh, but coming back to my point,
Uh,
the collaborative, voluntary aspect of Sword and Sorcery is something I have yet to meet in any other genre.
that's a very interesting point. Um, and I'll bet it comes about because most people probably don't want anything to do with us, so they got the wrong idea. But we're in our little neck of the woods. Um, and even though there was a boom in the '60s and '70s, and having authors write this stuff and everything, I mean that was not consistent. It died out in the '80s. Um, I kind of like the idea that it's at this level. Nobody's making money, but if that's what you want to do, there's ways to do that. But we are doing it for the love of the game, because we love the genre. There is so much creativity. We appreciate what other people are doing, and we appreciate each other. I kind of like it at this level. I mean, honest to God. So I mean, if at some point it takes off like a rocket, and you got a bunch of people writing, commercially again, or whatever an editor wants or some publisher wants, it that fiction will be compromised probably to some extent. As soon as New York, I think New York, gets involved. Maybe not, but right now with small publishers, writers at this level, um, doing it for the enjoyment. I mean, look at what Oliver's doing. I mean, I really like that.
Yeah, it's a great
Well,
place to be. I think that's not a downer to end on at all.
I think
It's a
so.
resurgence of the indies, and I think that's where it's supposed to be and supposed to stay. Like
I agree.
there's an honesty and a purity
I
about it.
agree.
As soon as it gets tainted by the corporates,
I
you
agree.
lose heart and maybe you lose sight of the goal.
You do.
and
You do. You do. It becomes about something other
Yeah.
than the story
and
and the
that's the great
character.
part about these little indie publishers and Kickstarter and BackerKit and all these different crowdfunding things is
Yeah.
that
Mm-hmm.
people get to tell the story they want to tell, and it gets out to the people that want to read it.
Mm-hmm. That's precisely right. You're absolutely right, man. Yeah, that is it. That is it. It's a good feeling. It makes me want to keep writing. And I gave up for a number of years. I thought I'd failed. Um, but no, this is a whole new environment now. With this um, independent publishing, small publishing. Um, what's it called? Not
Self pub
instant publishing, but you know what I mean. No, it's yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, self publishing and stuff like. It's a good place to be. It's a wide enough arena. People can have their say. We can sort through the authors we
Hmm.
like. People can learn to write better. It's
Yeah.
it's good.
Well, I guess we can end on that. I'll say that in the time we spent talking here since I
Okay.
last checked the campaign, it's gone up to 83% funded now. So it's still going up at a good
Eighty-three
rate of
percent
knots. So
already.
congratulations on that again, sir. Yeah.
It is. It
It's
really
awesome.
is,
It's
man.
awesome seeing
Yeah.
that. So
Oh wow. See, I had to learn like how to gauge this kind of stuff, and Oliver's kind of educated me, and I was like, wow, yeah, that's pretty amazing,
yeah,
I
no,
guess, for this
it's
point
great.
in the process.
It's gonna get funded sooner than later. So looking forward to
Yeah, it sounds
anything
like it.
else you have planned. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us tonight, and I will
Absolutely.
drop all of the links to everything that we've talked about, the books, the campaign, the coming manuscript, and details, everything in the
Thank you,
description so
man.
that people
That'll
can
be
find
good.
it easily. So thanks again, David. Thanks,
That'll
guys.
be great. And give me a few
Yeah,
weeks and
no,
I'll.
no worries.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
was gonna give me a few
definitely
weeks. I'll
looking
get a
forward to
copy of
that.
the book.
We'll keep you to it. We'll keep badgering you about it.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice. Well, it was good. It was good.
Same.
Thank
Good
you.
Thank
talking
you.
to all
Pleasure
of
to
you
meet you.
guys.
Thank you,
so
sir. It
much.
was an honor.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Very.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
That's all.
Here we go. Bye,
That's all the
gentlemen.
stuff we have time
Okay.
for today.
Have a good
Thanks
night.
for following
Yeah.
us, and have as nice a day as you deserve.